Shannon's Lumber Industry Update. Hey everybody, welcome back to Shannon's Lumber Industry Update. Today is episode 107, and I've got a special guest with me this week. Matt of burlandgrain.com reached out to me, actually, and all fairness, Matt is a Patreon supporter, so thank you, Matt. And he reached out to me a couple times and said he wanted to talk a little bit about air drying. We talked about different types of kilns, we talked about drying, but he wanted to talk specifically about how to prepare your air drying space. So this was a great opportunity to talk to an owner of a sawmill who dries a lot of lumber, both air dried and kiln dried, and really kind of talk about getting prepped and getting set up for your own drying facility. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Matt at Burl and Grain. So I am pleased to welcome to the show Matt Farrell of Burl and Grain. Burl and Grain is an urban salvage Sawyer log slab provider out in Hillsboro, Oregon, near Portland. Correct, Matt?
Yeah, it's part of the Portland metro area.
Nice. So welcome to the show, Matt. I've been excited to talk to you. We've certainly chatted offline. Matt is a loyal patron. Thank you for that, by the way.
Absolutely.
And we've had several conversations over the years about getting him on the show. We actually have tried several times, and I've had issues pop up. So I apologize that it's taking me so long here.
Oh, no worries.
Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about Burl and Grain and tell us about your operation and give us the sales pitch?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on, Shannon. Appreciate it. And definitely excited to be on here. This is a great resource. We actually kind of give it out to our customers is when they come in and they have questions. I kind of refer them to your podcast to get a better knowledge of the product that they're getting. But we're
I'd like to hear that.
Yeah. And we're in Hillsboro, just outside of Portland, and we are like we're an urban salvage company that we do quite a few things. We have a retail space, so we sell to the public. We sell direct to furniture makers. We do custom milling. We do some custom kiln drying, kind of leaning away from that a little bit. We actually make custom furniture. We do some millwork and some surfacing as well.
Wow. Yeah. What's the size of your staff?
There's myself. I have one full-time person and one part-time person.
That's what I thought. You do a lot for 3 people,
yeah.
Or 2.5 people, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
A lot of the folks I know that, maybe they started on the woodworking side, or maybe they started on the sawing side, and they kind of, the natural kind of growth is, all right, well, let's start using some of the wood we've sawn, or let's start sawing some of the wood I use. And then kind of one starts to fall away because, sawing lumber is a full-time job and building furniture is a full-time job. Mm-hmm. Not to mention all the millwork transformation and stuff that goes from log to joinery and everything. That's impressive. Cool stuff.
And that's kind of how that works. So my full-time guy is our sawyer. So he does all the milling and
nice.
Does some of the work with the kilns. And then my part-time guy is our shop manager. And then I fill in when he's not there. So it's kind of, and then I do everything else in between. So.
Right. Yeah. You run the business and make sure that you're the glue, basically, that keeps it running. Yeah. Very cool. So tell me a little bit about, well, first of all, what's your sawmill like? And then tell me a little bit about the logs you're getting and where they're coming from. Yeah,
we have a Wood-Mizer LT 40 super wide, and then we also have a 72-inch Granberg chainsaw mill we use for the larger stuff. For slabbing.
Nice.
Very cool. Yeah, we get most of our wood from local arborists and from construction companies and developers. So we worked with a couple. There's a larger housing developments they're putting up in the Hillsboro area, and we worked with them when they were clearing the lots to secure some of that wood to try and salvage what we could. And we work with a handful of local arborists and from the Portland area and Hillsboro and Washington County and stuff like that.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So the material, like what kind of species you're running into? I mean, this is pretty much all urban salvage, if you will. What are some of the species that you're getting to saw?
We try to bring in as much as we can, so it kind of has a pretty wide variety. But like the regular stuff is Oregon black walnut, English walnut, Oregon white oak, red oak, cherry, American elm, white elm, big leaf maple, silver maple, black locust. Then we go into the softwoods as well with like cedars, like western red and deodar. We do some Doug fir, stuff like that. We try and just take what we can. Then we'll get some like smaller like applewood trees or I think that's about it. I can think of some dogwood we recently did.
That's still pretty diverse.
Yeah.
So I'm real curious. Every time I've spoken, both on the show and in just my day-to-day life, for some reason, I've had a lot of dealings with folks in the Pacific Northwest lately. And all of you guys have your own version of species. You all have, you have Oregon white oak and you have an Oregon maple. And, it's always, and, some of that is, as I chalk that up to just being Oregonians. Seem to be very proud of your state. So there's always, everything has an Oregon in front of it. But I mean, there is some validity to this. I don't want to make fun of it. Can you tell me, like, what is Oregon white oak? Let's pick on white oak for a little bit. How does it vary from like the white oak that I get out east?
I mean, I guess I would probably turn that question back on you, Nunes Quercus Garryana, but what do you see the differences for from our oak to your oak?
Well, it tends to be, and this is typical of, because what really the I don't know, cultivar is the right word. I think it's variant. I might even say subspecies. This is where my, dendrology, lack of formal dendrology training gets me. So I'll probably get the terminology wrong, but let's just say the variant. Anytime you've got a variant like that growing in the climates that we have in the Pacific Northwest, and a lot, as I understand it anyway, the Oregon white oak, it's coming from the wetter parts of the state.
Yeah.
Because of course there's that whole other part of Oregon that people don't really think about. They think, oh, it rains all the time. No.
A high desert area that has like a completely different.
Yeah. Right. Eastern Oregon is dry. So the temperate rainforest environments that you get in like the Portland region and then running up into like the Olympic range in Washington, obviously water is not an issue. So you just get slower growing, denser growth trees. So Quercus alba, the typical white oak that I see all across the Appalachian region, hardness of about 1200. Garryana, I want to say is 14, but I don't know that off the top of my head. The density, however, and the closeness of the growth rings, just the growth rate of the tree, is very different. Those growth rings are packed a little bit closer together, and therefore the color just appears different because you've got, it's the denser woods that's the darker stuff. Take something like Douglas fir. Douglas fir is often called to have like a pinkish hue, and it's as blonde as can be, but those really, really dense late growth bands are very pink. So it gives the whole wood this pinkish cast. Well, the denser white oaks are the same situation where they end up having a lot more brown in them. Workability wise, I don't know that it's going to be that much different.
Right.
Certainly it's a little bit harder. It may feel harder, especially for a guy like me with hand tools. It may feel a little bit harder under the chisel. I doubt your machines are really going to care that much. But it's just one of those things where you're dealing with a regional variation of there's a lot more rain.
Right.
You essentially have temperate rainforests. And I stress that word temperate. People get confused. Rainforest, what are you talking about? It's cold up there. Rainforests can still be cold. It's just temperate. It's not tropical rainforest.
Right.
So, a tropical version of white oak would probably be very, very different. Would still be very dense and have tight growth rings, but it would be a lot more oily, a lot more resinous. It would have a lot more bug defense type stuff where up in the Pacific Northwest, I'm not going to say you don't have bugs, but you don't have the intense heat and everything where you need more of an oily resinous defense against it.
So that would be my guess. But at the same time, head a little bit south of you and start moving into like Northern California, and they have their own variants of white oak, that are much drier, more that Mediterranean climate that is almost unique. Well, specifically to Southern California, Northern California, not so much, but they have a very odd climate structure down there. It's kind of dry. Sometimes it's wet. Sometimes it's cold and dry. Sometimes it's not. It just produces really interesting setups. And then you've just got the whole aspect of it being a coastal region. So wind and salt and all that stuff can do crazy things. So I guess what are the other Oregonian? Well, myrtle is the one that comes up.
For sure. Yeah.
What's some of the other ones that are kind of unique to your region? I think you mentioned just a few of them a second ago.
Yeah, Claro walnut.
Of course. Yeah.
I think that's popular. I think some people like that.
Yeah, a few.
Yeah, a couple. Yeah.
Now, when you say Claro walnut and you say Oregon walnut, is that the same thing?
Yeah, I think so. Right? They are the same species.
I honestly don't know. So.
Yeah. They're in the same species as like the Northern California. The Juglans, Hinsii, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And that's where things get a little difficult on the lumber side of things. Like, the dendrologist and the botanist will know. And that's when they get into subspecies and variants and cultivars, whatever the heck you want to call it. I think cultivar really is much more of a man-made type thing. Like Japanese cherry is a cultivar of cherry. It's been specifically engineered to have a double blossom and make it super pretty and ornamental. That has been cultivated, I think. The natural regional variations, I think those roll under, maybe subspecies or species. But really in the lumber business, and especially in the heavy commercial lumber business where I live every day, no one cares. Like it's walnut,
right?
And actually, like Claro walnut would probably be seen as a defect because it's got so much more character and color and more purple hues and things in it. And there'd be some guy like, oh, we got to steam that. We got to get rid of that stuff.
Yeah, it's not uniform enough for like whatever furniture project they might be working on. They want that uniqueness. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So it's all walnut, and honestly, like there are certainly variants of black walnut, but 9 times out of 10, by the time they get thrown in the kiln and run through the steaming process, you couldn't tell the difference anyway. So, we're not talking about that. We're talking in the urban and the micro sawmill and this kind of grassroots industry that I've gotten so excited about over the last couple of years, where we get to embrace the regional variants and play with those kind of things. And thank goodness for guys like you, because these woods would not get any press. They wouldn't get any use, or if they did, it'd just be called white oak. Oh, look at that white oak table. Well, now, no, that's Oregon white oak.
Right.
And you can tell the story, and more importantly, tell the story that it was growing in, this guy's yard over here, which is, I think, the cool part.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people will enjoy
as a woodworker, certainly. I'm fascinated by these little subtle changes based on a regional climate variation or something that gives us an entirely different wood. And I love the fact that we're really just now starting to get access to it. Even though if you go back far enough, they all had access to it. Like the sawmill, the business model that you use and a lot of the guys that have on the show use is very much the same as it was 200 years ago. It was the village sawyer, and the trees came down and the village sawyer sawed them up, and those boards stayed within the village and everybody built things out of it. So this idea of putting on a truck and shipping it across the country, and I'd be willing to bet that the Douglas fir you do saw is not the really nice Douglas fir, because that's already been sawn and shipped to me, or people like me on the East Coast.
Right.
Douglas fir grows in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia, yet you can't seem to find it in British Columbia, because the minute it gets felled and sawn, it's shipped usually on rail to someplace 3,000 miles away. So yeah. It's a weird economy.
Yeah, and you can, you drive around the state and you just see the giant operations, and you see the massive amount of logs that they're taking and instantly, and the rail actually runs through the yard. They're loading the train as they're cutting it, basically.
Yeah, we actually have a switch and lines that run right in the middle of our yard, and you would never know it because they haven't been used since about 1970. And the rails are basically buried. We buried them in gravel over the years so that the forklifts weren't bumping over it. And the switch, the fence is still there. There's a gate in the fence because the CSX line runs right behind the yard. And there's a switch out there, but it's been inoperative. And I believe CSX actually took out the switching mechanism. CSX, by the way, is the train company.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're national or not, but so you can look over the fence and see the switch is still in the tracks, but there's no box, no switching mechanism attached to it, because about 1970, 73, just box trucking became more affordable. And while rail is still being used, it's being used the break of bulk, the break of distribution is further upstream. So it's going into some massive, massive warehouse type facility loaded onto trucks because it's just more cost effective to get it into the individual yards, because how many yards have their own switch and have their own rail line running into them?
Right.
I can think of 3. So, and that's nationally. I'm sure there's more. I don't have any need to deal with them. So yeah, it's a change in the world. And I actually had a phone call the other day with a rail guy, logistics guy, who was saying that things are starting to go back the other direction because of competition. Let's just call a spade, because of Amazon, because they're using up all the trucks.
Right, that makes sense.
Just-in-time shipping. Amazon has their own fleet, but then they're also employing all these common carriers all over the place, and people trying to keep up with what Amazon does are sucking up all that into things. So they can make more money that way. You can pack a lot more merchandise and have more volume, more margin on that than loading an entire truck with, something that, if you're not careful, will be overweight and get you fined. And it only has one stop. So yeah, the lumber industry, yet again, is not a money-making industry, folks. For all the people who write me and go, I'm thinking about starting my own lumber business, and my first response is, think twice.
Yeah. Do you want to make money?
Long and hard about it. Yeah. Right.
If you do, try another
let's use that. Yeah, let's use that gloomy segue to go back to your origin story here and say, how did Burl and Grain get started? How long have you been around?
This is our 6th year as a business.
Okay. Nice.
And I was approached by the 2 guys that started the company. They started shortly before I kind of came on, because I had been working in the hardwood industry, and they asked me to come aboard as a consultant at first, because they wanted to get into the urban salvage. So I had worked with one of the partners buying trees from their arborist company, and started out consulting and kind of giving them an idea of how they should lay out their business and what they to expect, which was, a lot of work, a lot of time. And then shortly thereafter, just decided to kind of have a go with it with them, and start, running the business on the day-to-day operations for them.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And you have, we're looking at the business today. You obviously have a showroom, because you said earlier you're selling to the public.
Yeah.
Tell us kind of what's the inventory in the showroom? Is it all slabs? Do you have dimensional material? What's the showroom look like?
It's a mix of a couple different things. So we'll have large slabs, and then we have smaller slabs, and some live edge lumber. Then we have strict dimensional. We also have a cutoffs section with smaller boards for project stuff, and we'll have some wood for turners, some blocks, and
nice,
and some burls. Obviously, got to have some of those in the business. Mm-hmm. And then we have a little bit a small little showrooms with a couple pieces of furniture in there for examples to kind of walk people through if they want to take some of the wood in there to a further state.
Nice. Wow. Yeah, it really is full service then. Mm-hmm. So on the furniture side of the business, because it's such a different business model. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of balance? Obviously you said you've got a guy who does the sawing. Mm-hmm. And so, because in my experience, I've certainly built custom furniture in the past. I've done it enough to know that I did not want to make a living doing that.
Right.
but I mean, it's just such a client facing, so much consultation
Mhm.
when you're doing custom work. Or is this more of a thing where you guys are building kind of on spec, and selling what you've already built?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
We always kind of keep around a fair amount of like spec pieces, but we do a lot of custom stuff. But a lot of times we're working off the stuff we already have in the showroom. So the
Okay.
consultation part's a little bit, less than it would be if you're going from
Ah,
scratch. So like we'll have the table and we like, do you want something similar to this size? We'll have some options for legs, and like tabletops and tables are a bulk of it. So there's not as much of the design part of it. We can kind of
right.
like walk through that. I mean, we do some other things like we're currently making some like English style like garden benches and rockers for a landscape architect from some trees that we
Okay.
took down in a garden that they've been working on for like 30 years. So that one's a little more involved. We have to do like some design work and back and forth. But yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
most of our customers are pretty easy to work with. So kind of limits that.
Still, that's
Yeah.
that's pretty brilliant. Where you're sourcing. I mean, certainly there's the appeal of I'm buying furniture from a place that also saws their own lumber. That kind of single source thing. But being able to go in and like pick out the board, um, from a customer perspective, that's like, wow, that's really cool. Like, what a service. But like on your side, that makes things a hell of a lot easier. Like, oh,
Yeah.
we're going providing this great service. The catch is it's so much easier on us. So like, don't
Right.
be thanking us. This is fantastic. That I had not actually thought about that. And here's where my world differs, because certainly we have customers that come into us all the time, but
Right.
they have very, very large projects, homes and things like that. And it's hard to actually start thinking in terms of, a table or something like that. It's more of, I need, 5,000 linear feet of this for that feature wall. And then I need, 5,000 square feet of this for the deck. And it's just kind of a very different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So that's actually kind of fantastic, because I think about, the pieces that I had built. One of the things that I kind of always offered to the customer was, well, want to come to the lumberyard with me? Um,
Oh yeah.
and let me say, the one time that did work, it did not work.
Oh no,
Um,
what happened?
it sounded like it sounded like a good idea, but the woodworker, the furniture maker's ability to look at a stack of lumber and envision a piece of furniture is not a natural thing. I should say not natural, not that it's unnatural. It's just it's a learned thing.
Mhm.
So someone who does not do that can't see that. So I had this person who was just like, they couldn't visualize what I was talking about, and what they saw was a bunch of stacks of boards. And so like they were looking at some 6-inch wide boards, and they're like, yeah, but I want it to be much wider than that. It's like, no, 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 no. I'll take several and I'll glue them together in your board. They're
Right.
like, well, but then won't that look like a bunch of boards glued together? And I'm like, well, yes, but that's where I choose the right grain, and all the fun tricks that we do to make two boards look like one board. And they couldn't get past that. They weren't able to visualize the construction. Now, in your world, if you've got a bunch of slabs, and let's just say something simple like you're building a slab table. So you basically take board, slap legs on it. I know I'm grossly oversimplifying that, but at least, the top, the focal
Right.
point is what that customer is
Right.
looking at. That's a lot easier. And what I'm talking about is, it was a while ago. That's why I got into teaching woodworking. This whole idea of slabs and live edge slabs, it didn't exist in the market.
Right.
Nobody had them.
Mhm.
So it was always going and looking at dimensional lumber, and it ended up being very, very difficult. But I think someone that comes to you and they have kind of a table in mind, or a piece in mind, a form, a sideboard or whatever, to be able to kind of walk through the showroom, that's pretty brilliant. So
Yeah, it's
good on you guys.
actually interesting you say that, because like that disconnect is very real, right? Like I remember when
Yeah.
we first started the company, even we didn't quite have a machine that could surface everything. So when we would
Hmm.
try and sell a piece that was wider than the machine we had for surfacing, like they would look at a board and just completely, blank, reaction. And whereas I'd be like, oh, this is going to be beautiful once we surface it, because the patina's on it
Yeah.
and you can't see what's really happening. And then even like now everything in our showroom is, surface one side, so you can reveal that. But you talk about the like joining the boards together for like a plank top kind of style piece of furniture. We actually like intentionally, like when we built out our office, I made sure that we did a couple different plank tops in there so I could explain that process to them so they could see, oh, okay, well, this will look, uniform. It will, and you can get like a beautiful look without having to be a singular piece of wood that covers the entire surface area.
Yeah, it's something that I definitely, I don't know if take for granted is the right word. I'm kind of blind to, because I've been building furniture for quite some time, and I work with wood all day to the point where, I'm teaching woodworkers now how to kind of see the wood when it's roughs on, because there's a lot of them and that is definitely something that takes a lot of experience looking at a lot of roughs on lumber.
Right.
And even then, most of the woodworking magazines and at one point have said, bring along a block plane. Which I also say that doesn't really go over well at a lot of lumber yards when you start planing their wood right on the rack. Sometimes it's not the best thing.
Right.
But being able to actually visualize what the grain looks like underneath it, and the gnarlier the board or the gnarlier the species, the more difficult that is. Straight grain maple is one thing. It pretty much looks that way. There's just kind of a different color. But that how things fit together, I think that's almost more of like a societal like pandemic. We've lost touch with how things are made, despite the number of how things are made shows that are on TV. We truly don't kind of understand these things. We're so used to seeing finished products, and if it's not finished, it's like an IKEA type flat pack thing that gets assembled, and even then the panels are all assembled. So it's kind of interesting. I think that side of the business alone must be really fascinating to be able to kind of educate the customer. And, some of it is keep the secrets so that it does look like magic. So you can justify the price tag you just put on it. But at the same time, I think the more that they can understand the process, the more they will understand why it's priced the way it is. Like, look at all of the things we have to think about. You've got this beautiful board here and you want to make a table out of it. It's not quite as simple as, okay, let's slap some legs on it. Like I just said before. That's really cool. That's the stuff that I kind of enjoy working with. So,
and that's, that's kind of one of the goals, right? With a smaller business, like what we do is, you want to educate your customer as much as you can.
Right.
You want them to understand the process. You want them to understand like how things come to be. And we try to be like a resource in the community, even, from the smallest makers to like the bigger furniture makers that we work with as well. Try to like, be as much of a resource as we can.
Well, it's an important point to make, because it doesn't really matter how big the manufacturer is or how big the architecture firm is. They don't know either. And that was one of my big misconceptions when I started in the business, is you just figure, well, these contractors, they know about wood. They know that wood moves. Like, they had no idea.
Oh yeah.
Like, no idea.
No.
Certainly I'm painting a broad stroke there, but I'm not going on a limb when I say the majority of them do not understand the properties of wood. Go to an architecture firm that's not actually doing the carpentry work. They're just doing the design. They have no concept of it, but they are actually really fascinated by it. I've been doing quite a bit of kind of lunch and learn type things with architecture firms lately, and trying to basically what you're doing with your customers, trying to do that on a much larger scale. As you're designing, as you're putting together this building or this landscape architecture you're putting together, understanding the properties of the woods and understanding like what you're actually specifying. I know you love that color palette and you want it to be an 8-inch face, but you have to understand what that means. Like, what does an 8-inch face in, Iroko mean? Is that even possible? And how many boards do you have to get in order to get the number of 8-inch boards that you need? That type of thing really opens some eyes. And what we've discovered is, obviously, the more we can educate them, the more we educate them, the more they realize, oh, this is not my area. Like, I'm so glad you're here because I will never learn all this. So I'm just going to call you instead.
Oh yeah.
And that works out great, because then it becomes this kind of partnership relationship rather than vendor and customer. Now you're working together to design this vision and, source the right materials. And those projects are so much fun because you really get to collaborate more than just write an order.
And I'm
it's
sure
exciting stuff.
Sure, this is something that you deal with like on a regular thing, but occasionally you get the customer that you kind of have to walk them back from what their first idea was, because it might be like physically impossible for that project to happen. So
you mean every customer then, not just some customer.
I was trying to be polite.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
But like the customer comes in and is like, oh, I want a 6-inch thick white oak table that's 12 foot long. And you have to explain to them that they have to reinforce their house if they're going to put something that heavy in it,
Right. Yeah. And rent a special trailer just to get it home.
Maybe a crane to put it in the house, Yeah.
Right. Yeah. When you sell the house, it's going with the house.
Exactly.
I hope you're prepared for that. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. There's been many times in what I actually think, kind of coming back to your business and this idea of just the stereotype of your business, the small sawyer, the unique species that you offer. Mm-hmm. What I run into a lot is, as you start to walk that customer back and get at the heart of what it is they actually want. Like they come to you with this table and, I get it a lot because we use a lot of teak. I want it built in teak. Okay, great. Why? And it comes down to, they don't really know anything about teak. They just want that color. Right. They want that kind of honey brown color. And the other things they want really have nothing to do with that. And you end up introducing them to other species that could probably do the job better or cheaper or more sustainably, or let's face it, Myanmar's in the news lately for a lot of political bad stuff. So, all of those things, let's maybe look at a different species. And businesses like Burl and Grain and any of the sawmills that I've spoken to are opening up other options like Oregon myrtle. It just so happens to have a bit of a yellowish hue to it. You could substitute that for teak in certain areas. White oak is so unbelievably popular. Specifically, rift white oak right now is so popular. And the more that we can introduce people to all the glory that is white oak, that is not just perfectly vertical grain stuff, and frankly, getting into like a coastal species or a temperate rainforest species like Oregon white oak, it's going to have a lot more what you might consider to be defects than the Quercus alba of the Ohio River Valley or the upper Appalachians or something. And customers start to see that, and they change their minds entirely. They go totally different directions with their designs, and they start incorporating, swirling grain. Figure is not a defect anymore, and it's really exciting because there's just so many different woods that we can use, not just from a design perspective, but that we can use instead of mulching into mulch or sticking in a landfill or something like that.
Yep.
Anyway, well, one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about is drying, because I know you've got a strong background, got some education in drying, I think. I remember reading a bio somewhere of yours, probably on your website. Oh, yes, here it is. Oh, yeah. And, folks who are listening to this, you have to go to burlandgrain.com anyway, but you need to go to their About page just so you can see all the hipster beanies and the flannel shirts. How do you know you're buying from a good lumber yard? They all wear knit beanies and have some sort of flannel on.
Yeah.
Except the CFO. What's up with the CFO with a button-down shirt and a beanie?
I don't know. I tried to make him pick from the wardrobe that I had set up there, but he just wouldn't take it.
Come on, Kelly. We gotta send him something.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do lumber update podcast beanies.
I would love to have one of those.
But anyway, I'm getting off topic here. But this is where I was reading it. You've certainly you're a certified kiln technician, so you actually know what you're talking about. So let's talk first about what your drying facilities are now, and then let's hit on the fact that you said you don't do as much custom drying anymore. So what's your setup look like now, and more importantly, kind of walk us through. You've sawn a log. Log fell down. You got it from an arborist somewhere. You've sawn a log. Where do you go from there?
So we're going to take the stuff right off the mill, and then we're going to stack and sticker, with the 16-inch on center sticker starting from the left hand side, like on the edge, wax and stuff like that. And then we have basically a like robust like carport with a roof and stuff that we have shade dryer all around, and then we will stack and sticker everything in there and keep it out of the elements, so that keep it, especially with the rain in Oregon and sticker staining, right. Some of the issues that can come up with that. We keep everything underneath there so that we can. And it'll sit there and air dry until we get it to the right moisture content to put it through our two L200 Nile kilns that we have, like 40-foot reefer containers. Okay.
Yeah. Say that again. What containers?
Reefer containers, refrigeration containers.
I know what you were saying, but it's just sorry. Here in Maryland, tomorrow weed becomes legal, so I was
that's all
reefer container.
Right, I got it. All right.
Apparently it was like, really? A reefer container? Okay, never mind. Did you hear that interview I did with the guy at Hempwood? You guys need to talk. Anyway,
so we fill it with weed, each container, nice. And that's how we dry it. Yeah.
All right. It's smoked wood. That's the new thing. There's baked maple. Now there's just well,
stone
now there's
maple?
the new baked maple. It's also baked maple, but a different kind of baked maple. Anyway, we've gotten off topic here.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, so you've got your kilns. So let's talk a little bit about that first step, though. You're sitting them in an air dry yard, and you said you bring them down to the target moisture, and then you put them in the kiln. You know that I'm leading you here because I know why you're doing this, but talk to me about that moisture percentage. What is that moisture percentage? Is it the same for every board? How do you determine what that is?
Typically we're trying to get everything below 30%. If it's a hardwood, below 30% moisture content before we're sticking it into the kiln there. And we got to try and get it into a space that we can somewhat limit the conditions in which it's air drying. Or at least some control over it. And that's why we use that large like carport area with the shade dry, so we can keep the sun off of it, rain, any sort of like dirt, and things like that, so that the degrading doesn't happen prior to going into the kiln.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't that kind of also funnel the wind a little? I mean, you're controlling the wind even. So if it's a carport, like I'm thinking, it's open on 2 ends, but closed on the sides, or
it's open on all 4 sides.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm thinking of like one of those like arched shaped carports. I don't know why. For some reason, that's what's in my head. Okay.
Yeah, right. And then we have shade dry
just a covered
on the 3 sides, and then the front there.
Nice, very cool.
So
and what is it? I know that there's no magic to 30%, but 30% is the number you're kind of shooting for. And tell us why. Why do you want it at 30% before you put it into the kiln?
Because once you drop below 30%, a majority of any, checking, warpage, and honeycombing is like limited, and you should be below the point in which the wood movement should be like at its highest risk.
Right. Good answer. You passed.
All right.
No, I wanted someone other than me to say it because I feel like I've said that like 1,000 times on this show. And this is where the double-edged sword, as excited as I am about micro sawmills and people starting up sawmills and selling their lumber, because I think we need that. We desperately need that in the industry. There is a lot of lumber being destroyed. And I often, on the other side of the spectrum, when talking about joinery and talking to woodworkers, I am saying, look, people, don't be afraid of wood movement. Like, I feel like mass media made people so afraid that their table they built is literally going to explode. Oh my God, the wood's going to move and it's going to like fall apart one day. It just doesn't happen that way. But if you stick really wet wood into a kiln, it can happen that way.
Yeah, I also think some of that fear too comes at least from the customer like that we deal with, is that a lot of people don't know about customer wise don't know anything about the drying process and aren't familiar with what it entails, and then they get something from a guy in the woods with a mill, and they don't know that it has to be dried, and then they make the table and they're like, I don't understand. A year later, this thing looks like a potato chip.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, the fact that, like I said earlier, contractors don't realize wood moves. There's no understanding that, like, I think people inherently, maybe they don't, like, maybe people don't realize that like a tree is full of water. You think they
Right,
might, but
right,
again, maybe I'm too close to it.
right.
I'm going to start going out on the street and just asking people, "Do you know that this tree is wet?"
Shannon
They
man
may
on
not.
the
They may not
street.
realize that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to get myself arrested is what's going to happen. But yeah, this idea that the sopping wet wood thrown into a kiln, now it can be done, but you have to essentially emulate air drying in the initial stages in that kiln.
Right.
So, like, I've often spoken of a species, the troublesome species like holly. Holly will stain,
Mhm.
and if you want it to be bright white, you got to stick it in the kiln like almost immediately, like the same day you felled the tree, if at all possible. But just because you're sticking in the kiln doesn't mean you're cranking the temperature up to,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
100 C. It's a schedule. It's very much like, a recipe.
Mhm.
This amount of steam, this amount of heat for this amount of time, and then you slowly increase the heat while also injecting more steam. Of course, this is a dehumidification kiln I'm talking about, where you have that type of granular control. But we will, like, and white oak is a good example, because white oak can be particularly troublesome. It's obviously very
Sure can.
prone to the honeycombing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the gnarlier the white oak, the more difficult it can be. So we will often buy green white oak,
Mhm.
just because
You can control it.
we, yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
We don't trust anybody. That's what it really comes down
That's
to.
fair. Yeah. I kind of look at it that same way. Like sometimes what people offer to sell us kiln dried wood, and I'm always apprehensive because I kind of want to be part of every stage of it, to know that what I'm
Right.
getting is
Yeah.
what I expect.
Yeah, let me see your references first, and then we'll buy your kiln-dried wood. But yeah, what we will take it, and in the white oak instance, we will actually put it in the kiln right away. Like
Oh,
you, we
okay.
have an air dried area, although we have an air dry yard.
Mhm.
It's much bigger than a carport, but the white oak won't go out there.
Mhm.
It will actually go into a kiln, simply because we can control the environment of the kiln. We're not actually turning on the kiln, but we're closing the doors to the kiln and turning on the fans.
Mhm.
And that, of course, keeps it out of the wet, but it also kind of controls the column of air around it. There's no
Yeah.
heat at this point, and we will essentially, um, I was going to say metaphorically, but no, literally warm up the kiln over the course of about a week. And it's slowly, temperature is being introduced into it, but never really, really high. We don't
Mhm.
actually turn it on for a kiln cycle until it's been in there for a full week, and it's like uncomfortable room temperature, by the end of a week, and maybe a little bit more of that. Really uncomfortable room temperature, put it that way.
You're trying to
Um,
you're emulating like a summer essentially, right?
yeah,
So even
essentially.
when so you have like that consistent, do you use pre dryers at all either, or just the kilns themselves?
Just the kilns.
Okay,
Essentially, the kilns in that phase, that is a pre-drying phase,
right,
essentially.
that makes sense.
But the key there, you just said, was consistency.
Hmm.
So sitting in air dry yard, we all only have a certain number of hours of sunlight a day, and some days we don't have any sunlight at all, and some days we have a lot of wind, and other days we have no wind, and some days we have rain and no rain. But say it's perfectly mild all the time, that can be great for air drying. But when the sun goes down, the temperature drops.
Hmm.
So we can stick it in our pre-drying stage of the kiln, and essentially, if you were to graph it, it would be a constant line, a
Okay.
constant slope of drying, rather than the day and night cycle that you would get, or a passing storm or anything like that. Because above that 30% range, when those wood fibers are still quite spongy and soft, they
Hmm.
haven't been kiln hardened yet, they are going to pick up the moisture of a passing storm. The kiln dried stuff won't. That's why we kiln dry it. But sticking it into that controlled environment, it basically speeds up the air drying process. Um, when we have a species that can be finicky, like white oak, poplar,
Right.
we'll stick it in the air dried yard for months. Who
Right.
cares? The poplar's so easy to dry. We'll stick it out there simply because it's cheaper to buy it in multiple truckload quantities, and we just don't have a place to put it. So we'll stick it in the air dry yard for 3 months, 6 months, whenever we need it, and then we'll pull it in and kiln dry it. Of course, we also buy a lot of kiln dried poplar because it is so easy to dry.
Right.
But yeah, it's so important to pay attention to that air drying phase. And it doesn't have to be perfectly controlled and consistent like I'm talking about. Obviously, you've got a carport. Um, So explain to the listeners, when you're referring to a pre-drying process, what are you guys doing for pre-drying, or your pre-dryers? Talk to us about that.
Pre-drying, as in like during the air drying phase?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna, we'll have it within that carport area, and we're gonna use our moisture reader to kind of track it as it's going, to make sure that it's not getting, too much airflow or anything else that could cause like early defects.
Yeah.
But that's most of the process there. I mean, that's what we can do. There's probably more ideal situations, but gotta have to work with what we have space wise. And
what do you do if temperature, or excuse me, the elements turn against you? Suddenly a huge, wind coming. Well, I was going to say wind coming off of the eastern part of Oregon, but that doesn't really happen because the jet stream goes the other way. So yeah, I guess you don't really run into that.
Yeah.
Or if you do get like a big windstorm, it's going to be wet air coming in off the coast, right?
Right. And then, like as far as the airflow in the shelter, it's already kind of restricted by that shade cloth that we're using.
Right.
So it kind of keeps things, so we can kind of keep a relatively consistent, condition for the wood in there.
Right. So is there anything else? Let's talk a little bit, like one step upstream from air drying. You've got this carport set up for air drying. Approximately how much wood can you put in there?
That's a good question. That's 20,000 board feet.
Okay. All right. So you got some space.
Yeah,
certainly.
It's like 40.
So
by
do you
18.
run into situations? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's nice and big. Do you run into situations where you've got material that doesn't fit and you don't have any place to put it, and kind of how do you handle when things start to back up like that?
Well, so we have other space in our yard as well. So some things that we think that can, like, when we're working with softwoods, none of that goes within that shelter, because we have more flexibility with that. We're going to cover the units, and we're going to, put lids on them. And then some of the other bigger, much larger slab stuff is going to be there for years. Sometimes we're going to tarp that and get it higher up off the ground, and make sure that it's not getting exposed to the elements, but still has some airflow. At least in the yard, our shelter is only maybe like a small portion of the yard itself, so any excess we do there. But the stuff that we're really turning over on a consistent basis, as far as like walnut, dimensional lumber, and oak, and some other hardwoods that we're working with, that's like kind of cycles through as fast as we do it. We're putting it into a kiln. So we haven't really run it. We're going to need to add more space as we expand, but for right now, we don't have an issue with overflow.
That's nice.
Yeah.
It's still, I mean, it takes up a lot of space. This is not. Yeah. That's one of the things that I've seen from the small, wood miser owner or whatever. They're just sawing boards and they don't quite realize like all the other stuff and how much space is needed and how much time and care needs to go into. Setting up your air dry. I mean, look at Cremona. Like, he's done whole videos on like setting up his bolsters to be perfectly level, so that he's drying, on a literally a solid foundation. But of course, Matt's got plenty of room.
He's got some place,
and then some.
A little bit. Yeah. I guess that was one of the things I think we were kind of chatting about before too. Is that like when you're setting up an operation like a urban salvage setup, is that's kind of sometimes like at the back of like your thought when you're trying to set up your operation, is like, how much room is this really going to take for me to have space to have this stuff stored, so that it's not just sitting out in the sun or in a puddle. But yeah,
hopefully not.
So, but I feel like I run into occasional guys like, I ran into so-and-so that's, he lives out in this rural area. He's got a wood miser, and I was just sitting kind of on the ground. He had a bunch of boards, so I grabbed them. Then they end up bringing it to us for the drying and the like kind of correcting what's there. So,
not to mention the possible rocks and the silica and all the stuff that's, eating up your planer blades and all that fun stuff. Talk to me about stickers. What are you using? What's the shape of them? Species, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, we're using like laminated ply stickers that are
Okay.
3/4 inch by 1.5 by 48 inch. And they're out of Doug fir ply.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
That's what we're using.
Are they just rectangular, or are they shaped into any kind of like, the I-beam structures or the Z structures, any of that type of stuff?
Just rectangular. And so with that, we make sure that they never are out in the elements, that they also stay like underneath that shelter, so that they're not getting wet or creating mold on them.
Introducing more problems to the board you're trying to air dry.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great other options. Just as far as budget wise, that's just been the most cost effective for us at the moment. There's some other really cool, interesting stickers out there. They just are about 4 times as much as what we're paying for the wood ones.
Oh yeah. You can pay a lot for the I can't remember. There's an actual copyright for this Z-shape pattern. Made it's essentially like an I-beam, but it's got Z-stripe like dados cut across it, so it's minimizing the points of contact with the wood.
I've seen that.
They're usually made out of Ipe 9 times out of 10. So right off the bat, you know that it's cheap. It's definitely a premium sticker. Actually, I believe Hearn Hardwoods, just north of me in Pennsylvania, uses those.
Right.
We've got I-beam ones made out of Ipe. We've never really found the need to minimize the contact longitudinally, because along the sticker, because the sticker's running perpendicular to the long axis of the board. And if you do things right, you're not going to get a bunch of sticker stain. And I think that's sometimes the really, really fancy stickers. It's kind of like, this will prevent sticker stain. It's like, well, maybe you should look at some other reasons why you're getting sticker stain in your stickers. Well, it's called sticker stain, so it must be the sticker's fault.
Yeah, I always found that
I think
one of the more problematic things with the sticker stain is just how is it interacting with the environment, right? Like if you've got a lid on it, is the water dripping onto the sticker, and then is the sticker getting wet and then staying wet through the drying process? Things like that.
Yeah. Red oak stickers, high amounts of tannins causing staining in the wood.
Yep,
that happened quite a lot.
Yeah.
Very nice. So then the airflow setup, are you using any kind of fans, or are you just letting nature do its job?
Just letting nature do its job. We have a good cross breeze there, but nothing too drastic, but and not too low that we need to add it. It seems to be working pretty well where we situated it on our property.
Right. And then the stacks themselves, any measures that you're taking in the actual stacking in order to kind of control some of the, are you band strapping or any of that stuff to control twist or cupping or anything?
No, mostly the weight of the other units are kind of controlling. Obviously not the top unit, but I always found that the banding was more useful for making sure things don't shift in the unit. Versus because there's the shrinkage over time, right? So that banding is going to get loose as it's air drying, right? So how much does that, unless you're ratcheting it consistently, how much does that help with the cupping and movement?
That's a really good point. Yeah, I know a lot of people who do that. And you're right. Really, the more important issue is to make sure it doesn't fall over and kill someone. That's the important part.
And then on the minor side of that, make sure that your stickers aren't shifting when you're moving the units around, and somebody's not paying attention. It goes through a kiln, and now you got one sticker slightly off and a little bit of bend in the board. Yeah,
which is now set as you put it in the kiln. Just like steam bending in a form. Yeah, it's interesting. So the good news, kind of the refreshing part I'm hearing here is, you certainly have put a lot of thought into that air drying step and making sure that, you're reaching a certain moisture content before you go into the kiln. But it's also not like it doesn't require a whole lot of stuff. It requires a good dedicated space that's kind of sort of out of the elements, it's covered. And it just requires attention, basically, care and feeding to make sure that things are not getting off the rails or anything. Because I do think that it tends to be polar opposites, right? Like the guy you mentioned before, he's got his board sitting in the dirt. And then there's the other extreme where people are employing, 9,000 different tactics. And actually, you could probably point to the company I work for as one of those. We just happen to have a lot of dehumidification kilns. And lately, because there's been more kiln drying happening outside of our yard, because more companies, well, like yourself, are now running kilns, we have not found the same pressure on all 7 of our kilns. So we can generally keep 1 or 2 kilns in reserve to use as air drying.
Yeah.
Is that level of control necessary? Absolutely not. Is
great.
it cool? Oh, heck yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah.
You can air dry really quickly.
Right.
But it's totally not necessary. I think the important part, and correct me if I'm wrong, it just seems to me, in just prepping the site, having a site and making sure it's level, making sure it's flat, that the site itself is not introducing moisture, so it's not in a mud puddle or whatever. Seems to me that's kind of the key to it, and then just paying attention.
Yeah, and restricting the amount of like sunlight that's going to hit that board too is helpful.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, just putting a cover over it is going to hopefully do that, as well as keep the water off. But then also keep in mind, as the sun dips in the sky, you don't want that sun baking right on the end grain, and only that one end grain. Oh, that can cause real problems. So that's where your shade
or the water coming off that lid, and like I said, getting the stickers continually wet. Like in the Portland area, we deal with a lot of rain. So if that's continually dripping onto that sticker, is that going to affect your boards because you have wet stickers the entire time as they're drying?
Right. Yeah. That's actually a really good point. You said that earlier. Just care and feeding of your stickers themselves. It's kind of, and I think we run into this in everything where, it's a tool and you kind of stick it off to the side when you're not using the tool. But we have to occasionally wax the tables of our joiners and things so they don't rust, and, oil your hand planes so they don't rust. Take care of the tools. Yeah. The sticker itself is a tool. You can't just throw them in a corner over there and expect that they're going to do the same job over and over again. It's a really good point.
Yeah, be thoughtful about it.
So, as someone who's kind of been brought in to consult in certain places, if you've got someone that is, maybe just started up and they're starting to produce a lot of lumber and are basically getting to the point now where they're like, hey, this is more than just the boards that I'm using for my own projects. I think I might turn into this. Any kind of tips or trips to help them get started on the right foot?
Yeah. Let's say, find and plan an area in which you want to, keep that lumber as you're going to go through the air drying process, and just, be thoughtful and plan ahead on it instead of kind of doing it as a second thought, and trying to catch up afterwards. Because as you're milling, you're just going to kind of bottleneck into that part of it, right? So you're trying to figure out where you're going to put the stuff, how you're going to get the stacks, uniform, and other things like that. So, yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, think of it this way: if you don't have some sort of plan in place for the after the milling, you're essentially undoing the milling. Like you're destroying the boards that you put all that labor into actually sawing. If you don't have a good setup for the air drying, there's going to be a lot of problems. And there's no amount, I really don't think there's any amount of kiln drying that can correct poorly air dried material.
Right.
All kinds of bad stuff can happen.
Yeah. And you got to, I guess, kind of look at it like if you go out and you either purchase or you get this log that you're really excited about and you mill into it and the wood is beautiful and it's absolutely gorgeous. And then you just kind of throw it to the side. And then now all that hard work into that, you're going to end up with a product that's, usable or barely usable. And then what you saw coming off the mill isn't what you end up actually having.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really upsetting when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about solar kilns? Have you ever used one?
I have not. I feel, I haven't used one, but I'm just unsure. I guess there's probably certain things that would work well in that, but I just don't know if everything would work well in that. But I don't really have much experience or knowledge about it, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who've run them, and I'm curious. I'm solar kiln curious.
Exactly.
Put it that way.
Same.
Because kind of like we're using our pre-drying kiln, basically keeping the kiln turned off. And because we have a controlled, actually enclosed space with fans, the solar kiln's kind of similar in that you're enclosing it, different than your carport. You're literally enclosing it entirely. And then of course you're letting the sunlight come in to actually heat up the space. To me, that's the part that scares me.
Agreed.
Because I feel like,
that's where all the damage is going to come.
Right. Now there's a lot of folks that say, well, the day-night cycle, it never gets that hot because it cools off the night before, and then it slowly heats back up again. And it's all very slow heating, slow cooling. Condensation that occurs continues to keep the moisture levels up. I'm certain that there are probably ways that you can monitor it and vent it and help control it. But it kind of like at that point, you kind of wonder, like, why not just have a kiln?
Right. Like you were speaking earlier about having that consistency, like, and we're kind of discussing this, like, so that, like, but it seems like to me the solar kiln just throws that out the window, right? It's just at the whim of what there is.
Yeah.
And, sunlight is not your friend when it comes to drying, at least green wood. So
right.
Yeah.
I think it's the enclosed nature that, while it's heating, that moisture that's evaporating out is staying in there. So essentially the relative humidity inside the kiln is going up. As the heat goes up, so is the relative humidity. So that is kind of a buffer or a protection. And that's just how a dehumidification kiln works. The hotter the temperature, the more steam we inject. Because, if you remove the moisture and heat it up, it's called combustion. That's bad. It's really bad.
I think that's not good for wood, yeah.
Yeah, generally. I don't care how popular the Shishugibon thing is. That's not good. That's really bad. And I think that's where the curious part of the solar kiln comes from is like, I'm afraid of that uncontrolled sun. And the fact that it's enclosed means that it's just going to get hotter and hotter and hotter in there. But it does also mean that it's going to get more and more humid. So I think that can actually deflect the possible damage caused by the sun. And the fact that it's an enclosed space means that you might have more control over it. But it also feels very Wild West.
Yeah.
It's like ammonia fuming. Throw it in a tent, walk away, come back and check in a couple hours. Is it good? I don't know.
Right.
Meanwhile, there's volatile chemicals in the air.
And I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting too, because I know of some other like smaller furniture makers out here that like will buy some of wood green, and then they have kind of like mimicked like a small DH kiln kind of setup with like some heaters and some dehumidifiers, and they like control with some, and it's like you said, like compared to solar kiln, it seems like they're probably about the same cost, and that seems more effective to me and more controllable than doing that.
Yeah. Even the Windsor makers I know that will, steam bend and then put in a kiln to set. That's as unscientific as a foil lined box and a light bulb. But in that instance, we're actually trying to set it in whatever form it's in. So you're restraining it. You're already bending it and clamping it into a shape you want. And ideally, it's been riven and all that stuff ahead of time, so that the wood is not full of knots and completely left to go where it can go. But it does seem like solar kilns, you could add a lot of control to it, but at what cost?
Right.
Throw a lot of monitors and automation into it, and then it's like a box with a dehumidifier, and it might have done just the same.
Right.
I don't know. Again, the solar kiln operators out there, I have yet to find a solar kiln operator who's done it for more than about like a week who wants to come on the show. So those of you who are like solar kiln experts, please give me a call. I want to bring you on the show, because I get enough questions about solar kilns.
Yeah.
Because it does seem like, a cheap option. And a great way for like the guy that doesn't want to resell a bunch of lumber, but just is listening to this and going, oh my God, I've got to figure out my air dry situation because I'm destroying my boards. And it doesn't make sense for that hobbyist to go and, build a carport, or buy a carport, and have, 15,000 board feet of lumber in there. So how do they do it? And it does seem that the solar kiln is that solution. I just don't have the answers there.
Well,
sounds like neither do you. So
I'll be interested when you have.
Jeez, Matt, come on.
I'll be interested when you have that episode, because I'd like to hear that answer as well. Always been
too.
Like I said, solar kiln curious for sure.
That's the best way to put it. That's a T-shirt right there. I'm making that happen. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. I think we've hit on it. Is there? I guess the next thought is you'd mentioned earlier about you did some custom kiln drying and not so much anymore. Is that due to lack of demand, or have there been problems there?
No, not lack of demand. It's just we're trying to. One is like, so every time we do a custom kiln drying job, it's that much less that we're drying of our own material.
So glad you
right?
said that.
So that's space, and then also like, I mean, inherently custom kiln drying is kind of a problem, right? Like, unless somebody's bringing me 4,000 board feet of similar thickness boards and species, there's, because typically like a customer is going to be, for us, is like anywhere between like one slab to like 1,500 board feet that they want to stick in a kiln. Right. And so then you're dealing with a variation of species and moisture contents. I mean, and we won't take anything unless it's a certain moisture content anyways. So sometimes people come there and they'll bring their slab and they'll be like, oh, it's at 15%, but they're using a surface moisture meter that reads like 1/2 inch into a 3-inch slab. So that's not an accurate measurement, So right. that's an issue there. And then trying to mix species and thicknesses is, just like a no-no, in my opinion, for kiln drying. So we try to limit it unless I think it's something that can like actually go in with the current run we're doing, or they have a large quantity. Like right now we're running an entire kiln full of like black walnut slabs that were all cut at the same time at all the same thickness. So like that will take on all day, but we also get a lot of people that are just looking for like, I've got one 3-inch thick, white oak slab that was cut, 6 months ago. And so, we have to like kind of explain that process to them. So just trying to lean, further away from that unless it's the right project so we can keep our own wood coming through the kilns.
Right. And that's similar to what I'm hearing from other folks. And it's I fully agree with it and I kind of fully support that. But at the same time, it's kind of like, because you do have these people that have a log, and they've milled that log and quickly realized that they can't get as many board feet as they thought they would out of that log. But then they have these boards and they're like, I need to get it kiln dried, or they're worried about bugs. Believe me, I've got an episode coming up that's going to get everybody worried about bugs, unfortunately. So they're thinking I need to get it. Yeah. So they're thinking I need to get it kiln dried. And I often am hearing like, well, what should I do? Because I'm getting turned away for the reasons that you just cited. And they're extremely valid reasons. So I'm trying to figure out like, what can people do? Maybe that's where the solar kiln thing comes in. But there doesn't seem to be, just put it this way, as much as the micro sawmill and the small kiln operation has kind of exploded in recent years, those very quickly, like the growth curve is really exponential. Like you go from sawing a couple of logs to now suddenly you're operating multiple kilns. That happens very quickly to a lot of people. And once you get to that point, you really can't allow for custom drying anymore because you're trying to get your own stock through. You've got more control over it. You really can't afford to tie up a kiln cycle, or for that matter, run the risk of, or the liability, frankly, of damaging someone's lumber because you just don't know like what you're being handed. And trying to dry smaller lots is always going to be more difficult. So I suppose that's where some of like the vacuum kiln operators come in, especially those bladder kiln things. If you have one of those, there just doesn't seem to be a small kiln drying in small batch. They don't mix.
Right.
It just doesn't seem to work that way.
And then
unless maybe
it's also tough too, because like, it's not a great revenue creator either, So it's like, do I want to invest in this? And then, then it's also, and, try to help everybody in the community, but, they're ultimately probably seeking out a different person that's milling it for them because they're going to buy it cheaper because it's not kiln dried. Then they're going to bring it to us to kiln dry it, where they could just buy the wood directly from us because it's already kiln dried, So, but, try to also be, like I said, a resource for the community. So we try to do our best to do as much of the custom stuff. It's just, we have to be selective, and in the future, we plan on
too.
Yeah. And we intend to add an eye dry at some point, just kind of for that reason, so we can run smaller batches and, obviously faster dry times for other things. But that's just kind of where we're at now.
Well, I've got since I've got someone who's got some experience drying white oak. I've got a question here
Mm-hmm.
that I'm going to throw out to you. The
Uh-oh.
guy, yeah, right. And even worse, he's from Pennsylvania, so it's totally different white oak, and totally different climate.
I lived in Pennsylvania, so.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, good.
yeah.
You're just the guy here. So this is from Joshua, who's in the Lancaster region, PA. So, Amish country right there. He's got some white oak that I'm trying to remember came from his brother or like his brother's cousin's former roommate or something like that. But the sawyer had a bunch of white oak cut down. They took it to a local mill. The sawyer said that he didn't want to mess with quarter sawing, so he slab sawed it to 9 to 10 quarter thick.
Mm.
So Joshua then stickered the lumber, stacked it on a flat concrete surface outside in the shade, and covered with metal to protect it from the rain.
Mm.
I wanted to air dry it, just as I have successfully done with walnut and ash. I also coated the ends with anchor seal right after it was felled. So he planned to let it dry for a year or two, and then perhaps build a solar kiln or take it to the local vacuum kiln. However, the white oak has surface checked like crazy.
Mm.
Why did this happen? I assume it means it dried out too fast. It was stickered and stacked in the shade and covered with tin. The tree was taken down in April or May of last year, sawn in July. So was my mistake getting it milled in the summer? Is this kind of checking typical with white oak? Did it check because it was too thick? How do I slow the drying down? So my initial thought is some of it could be that it was felled and the sap was rising and it was really, really wet and had a lot going on. But what do you think? I mean,
Oof.
I wonder what the checking, like how much checking is checking he's seeing, because white oak checks. Like,
yeah.
It's an open poured wood. It's gonna check.
And how much of the surface checking is really there, right? Is it like enough that when you run it through a planer, is it going to still be there? Or is it just like a slight surface checking that will, when you actually S4S that board, it's not going to be there?
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard. I don't know. It'd be hard to say because I'd have to see the actual drying conditions. But I mean, it sounds like maybe too much airflow. Maybe, like it is drying too fast, but also it's just white oak. And sometimes it's just a nightmare to deal with. So
yeah, there is that. Well, and that's the thing. Like, if it was drying too fast, he didn't say that he like put a fan on it or anything like that. So what do you do? Like, how do you? I mean, he's anchor sealed it. I guess you could slap another coat of anchor seal on.
Well, yeah,
latex paint or something like that.
Try and figure out what direction the airflow is coming from, and try and limit it from that side. Where it's
that's an interesting point. Is there a pattern?
Stack, like if you stick that stack out in the middle of a plain field, like where there's no restriction and it's got high airflow, it's going to just devastate that wood, right? Because it's just nonstop.
Yeah,
it's going to be more so than you would have in a kiln, like as far as airflow.
Right, you're like putting it in a wind tunnel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Suck all the moisture out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. I also wonder if there is any kind of pattern to the checking. Like if it's checking on one end and not the other, it's getting too much air on that one end.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
So maybe like rotate the pack 90 degrees. So you're putting your edge grain to the higher wind. We're really, really picking at straws here. But, it's hard to say. My gut reaction when I read this was, it's white oak, dude.
I was going to say,
check.
I was going to say, just cut a different wood, stay away from white oak because it just is a pain in the butt.
I'm not going to go that far.
I love white oak and it's beautiful wood. It's just sometimes it can be my nemesis when it comes to drying.
Yeah. Well, anytime somebody wants to complain about the cost of white oak, come at me,
right?
Because it is hard to produce, and also it's very easy to screw up, which is why so many people complain about white oak, because there's a lot of bad white oak on the market as well. But honestly, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say, hey, don't play with white oak anymore, but it is going to check. Like I run into this with decking a lot, especially tropical decking, because that's so dense. And a deck is probably like the worst thing you can ever do to wood. You stick it in sunlight only on one face all day long. You walk around on it. It's the worst possible condition for wood. But during the bright sunshine, like think of a beach house, it's just getting, radiated on top all day long. And what happens is the wood dries out dramatically and checks open all over the boards.
Mm-hmm.
And you take a species like Kummer or Ipe that's really, really dense, you will see like wide open checks across the entire face of the board, and you freak out. And then like 5 o'clock in the evening, they're gone. They just close up again,
right.
And you would never know that they were there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the wood's reaction to that uneven heating and drying that's happening, because the underside is staying, well, not cooler, but it's in the shade the whole time. So it's relieving that tension and opening up those checks. If it didn't open those checks, there would be bigger problems. You might have more buckling or actually splitting or delamination or shake that would happen. So in this instance, it could be that the checking he's seeing could be good. It's drying,
mm-hmm.
but again, without seeing it,
right.
It's hard to say. What I would recommend, Joshua, is I feel like he gave me a time frame, but it started to check. What I would say is take a board and mill it. Well, just do some moisture checking first. Let's see where it is. If it's checking, put your moisture meter on it and, check it everywhere and see what that moisture is like. But it might be worthwhile actually surfacing a board and seeing if you can remove those checkings. It may just be, for lack of a better term, kiln defect, even though it's not in a kiln, but drying defect is what you're seeing. I guess the important part, and from your perspective, Matt, is I can't really think of a way that he would slow down the drying. Can you?
Other than limiting the airflow? Not really. I mean, it sounds like most of that setup sounds like it's pretty, ideal for what he's got going.
Yeah, I agree. No, you're right.
And I wouldn't be afraid of the surface checking unless it's, really severe. I mean, that just sounds kind of like white oak drying, like you said.
Yeah, it's kind of par for the course. Yeah, that may be that he could, I'm just reading back through his paragraph, if he could actually put up some kind of wind barrier, and your shade curtains, what do you want to call those things? That are keeping it, keeping it in shade the whole time. Yeah, that goes a long way to cutting down on the wind and stuff.
That might be a good solution for that as well, because it's relatively cheap to find a small piece of shade cloth, and you could drape that over the entire unit, and that will restrict the airflow and in any other like sun that may be coming from the sides or ends.
That's actually, there we go. That's a good idea. Yeah. It's almost like tarping it, but without the
restriction of
airflow.
Tarp.
Yeah. There you go. There's your answer. It took us a while. But
finally got there.
We got to it. See, this is what I deal with on this show. It's fun, right?
It's great.
Good stuff. Well, I think we've hit it. I really appreciate you coming on here. Give us one last pitch for Burl and Grain. How do we find you? And why should we find you?
Absolutely. And then I actually have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay. Yeah, please.
You can find us at burlandgrain.com, and there's links there to our Instagram and Facebook. Just reach out to us if you're looking to have something custom milled, or you're looking to buy lumber or slabs that are all locally produced, or you want to come and walk through and pick out a piece of furniture to have made or something we already have in stock.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah. Definitely check out the Instagram. There's some fun stuff on there.
Yeah.
Good wood porn. Good stuff.
Yeah. Then I got a couple questions for you, just real quick ones here for you. So,
sure.
So you went to school for music, right? And
I did.
I am also a musician, formerly a musician at some point. I was just curious, like,
we all formerly a musician.
So you went to school for music, and did you perform like outside of school? What did you do with that?
I did. I pursued the conducting route more professionally. Certainly got a degree in voice performance, and I've done art song, I've done opera, I did a lot of choral work, did a couple of solo gigs with orchestral ensembles, but really kind of got interested in conducting, specifically choral conducting, as an undergrad, and pursued that at the master's level. So did a gig, like the first job that most conductors get is as a rehearsal conductor. So you're not the guy that gets to put on the tails and gets the applause. You're the one that does all the work to prep the orchestra or the choir. And then like the fancy guest conductor from, St. Petersburg or something shows up and does like 3 rehearsals, and then you do the performance. There's always that kind of rehearsal conductor. Even in-house, where you have, your in-house conductor, there is an assistant that will run a great deal of the rehearsals. So I actually got a gig doing a light opera company, a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan type stuff. I was the rehearsal conductor for that. And that gig lasted about 4 days.
Oh wow!
And
okay.
they cut the budgets and laid everybody off and moved to like an audition community choir, not professionals. And it was a good experience. They relocated me out, relocated me back. So then I quickly went into smaller spaces doing choral conducting work with either local community choirs, church choirs, things like that, and continued to do performance work, audition for any number of performances. When I moved to Maryland, I did a couple things with the Peabody Conservatory. They have a whole season, and that is certainly, you're competing against Peabody Conservatory students, but you also can make a go of it. I did a couple shows with them, and yeah, it was one of those things where the conducting job I landed before graduating, so I kind of didn't really like put any other feelers out. I was like, hey, I got the job, and the job ended so quickly that I was suddenly in a situation where it was like pick up gigs left and right, and that was the story of my music career. And it was good.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun with it. But cool. Never anything that was like super huge that like, that was my big break. But it was also enough to make me realize that I love music as an avocation. And as an occupation, certainly one can make a living, but you got to really, really not just love music, but love the game. Right. You have to love auditioning. You have to love that business side of things. You have to love the fact that this is a part, but it's also a resume builder. And that was the part that I couldn't wrap my head around. It was like, I was just happy to be playing Leporello and Don Giovanni, not that what that would make my resume look like.
Right.
So yeah, it was one of those things that I've actually had this conversation as an alum of the University of Colorado. I've had conversations with music students, how they will call on alumni to, speak to them or, do one-on-one type things. And I'm constantly telling them, look, I don't want to kill anyone's love of music. Just be very aware that it is a business, and you need to be exposed to that business very quickly and make sure that you're okay with that side, because if you're not, you're going to hate it, and you're going to end up hating music, which is the really sad part of things. So I managed to come out of it a little jaded, but got away from it before I, started hating music by any means. So yeah. There's the short story.
Are you still performing at all, or?
It's been a couple of years since I've done anything other than just like singing in the local choir, and that really just comes down to bandwidth. Every time I think about it, I'm like, I should go audition for that. And then I realize that I have 3 other jobs.
Yeah, I was going to say,
kind of gets in the way.
Pretty busy schedule, I imagine.
Yeah. I keep thinking that I'll get back to it at some point, but it's one of those things where you kind of have to wonder where my hobby of woodworking turned into a career, which turned into another career. So yeah, these days I do a lot of performing in my own wood shop.
And the other question I had for is, did you perform the opening song for your podcast? Is that you? Or who did?
No, actually. Well, for those that don't remember, this was a segment on Wood Talk, and Mark literally, I think he went to Fiverr, the like graphic design service, and said, I want a jingle. And there was a guy on there. I'm pretty sure it's all the same guy, just
that's what I figured.
In different parts. Yeah. No. I thought about it. I should redo. I have a misspent youth and a cappella groups. I probably could pull out some barbershop and make that work. Maybe that'll be season, the 3rd year of the show that I'll re-record it.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all. I just was curious. I was like, I would like to know more a little bit about the musical background, and perhaps I missed it at some point on one of the podcasts. So,
well, it's one of those things where when you've been doing this long enough, you've told the conversation at one point, and then you don't know who's heard it and who hasn't heard it. So yeah, I'm always always happy to talk about it, because I talk about, like, when I say it was a great part of my life, it's still very much a part of my life. But that whole section of my career was something that it feels like a very long time ago. I guess it was, honestly, about 20 years ago now. Mm-hmm. But I'm so glad that I had those experiences. And I think anybody who has studied music and is not like a professional musician now will tell you they will not regret the music degree, because I don't know. I just feel like it makes you a more well-rounded person more than anything else. You have a great appreciation for many things. And there's so many computer scientists I know who studied music, or people, or vice versa, rather, who need that creative outlet. So I think it's very important for you.
Yeah, that's great.
So thanks for the question. Yeah, let's talk about that.
And thanks for having me on. Again, I just want to restate that this is just a great resource for all woodworkers of every level. And that's why I just constantly push that onto our customers, just so they have a better understanding. So thank you for putting this information out there.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. That's always, I've heard from a couple people who've said the same thing, and it's always kind of like, are we listening to the same show? So yeah, it's nice to hear that. Right on.
Great.
Well, thanks a lot, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
Folks, if you are in the Portland area, you know where to go. Go buy some Burls, because apparently they have them there. They better, in the name.
We got some.